Hello and welcome. This is Paul Sandhu. This is part two of the Plain Earth interview I did with Mark Sargent about a week ago. I posted part one about 4 days ago, and I must say it has had a tremendous response from viewers. As I warned in the intro to part one, I expected this topic to elicit a deep emotional response from viewers and listeners. This morning was based upon my own experience, and I must say that I was not disappointed. The topic of the plain earth seems to hit viewers like a ton of bricks, just as it happened with me. Judging from many of the comments on my YouTube channel, I'm led to conclude that the Matrix has a strong hold on people's minds in regards to this subject. And sadly, many people will not be able to break free from the hold that the Matrix has on their minds. When people attack the messenger rather than critique the message, it shows a want of critical thinking ability in the individual. By the way, if you want to see how a message is discredited by attacking the messenger, watch the movie Kill the Messenger. This is a great movie and I highly recommend it. This movie is the true life story of Gary Webb, who connected the CIA to the drug trade in the US. Okay? This movie that's Gary Webb. He was a journalist from San Jose, California, and he broke the story that the CIA was bringing in crack cocaine into Los Angeles and the rest of the country too. And first the story was big. He won like Journalist of the Year award and everything else, and then a discrediting campaign began, and eventually he committed suicide with 2 shots to his head. Okay, so that's Gary Webb's story. So it's an interesting movie. I would recommend that you watch it. Okay, so to this day, despite overwhelming evidence that the CIA, DEA, and other alphabet agencies and police departments across the country are heavily involved in managing the drug trade, trade being the operative word since it is a business, most Americans are ignorant of this fact because the media is complicit and they hide all this illegal and immoral activity that is conducted by the highest levels of government. Okay, so to this day the evidence is there, yet most people are ignorant of this fact and they would not believe it even if the evidence is laid out in front of them, as it has been time and time and time again. Okay, the powers that be know their greatest ally in covering up their nefarious deeds is the fearful public, who will defend the status quo even to the point of destroying messengers like Gary Webb, who were just reporting the truth, nothing more. In regards to the topic of the plain earth, in the intro to part one, I did say I would like to build a case that would stand up in a court of law. Okay? In part one, I presented nothing more than a part of the opening arguments. Okay? So that was basically, I would say, the equivalent of just the opening arguments, nothing more to the case, yet many people have reached a verdict when the trial has not even yet begun. I will continue to present the evidence that I've gathered so far and will continue to gather. It may take months, maybe longer, to present all this evidence, but those who will stay the course with me as I do these programs, interviews, and even my own videos on this subject, they will be rewarded with the truth. Schopenhauer said the truth passes to 3 stages. Okay? In the first stage, it is ridiculed. In the second stage, it meets with violent opposition. In the final stage, it is accepted as self-evident. I believe the day will come when the truth of the plain earth will be considered to be self-evident, when people will be going, oh yeah, I knew that way back when, Okay? After it passes through the ridicule and the violent opposition stages. So we'll wait for that day. One clarification I want to make is that I have changed the title from Flat Earth Facts to Plain Earth Facts. The right terminology is very important in conveying the right meaning. I believe flat earth is not the right term to describe the earth and the topic that is being discussed. Plain earth, as P-L-A-N-E, earth, is much more appropriate because the earth is not flat everywhere, but it is a plane everywhere. The social engineers of our world choose words and terms very carefully. For example, we see symbols of the globe everywhere, especially in banking, which should be a big red herring for everyone, okay? and also in verbiage repeatedly used in the media when an agenda is being pushed. For example, global warming, globalization, and Alex Jones's favorite word globalist. These words are all carefully chosen to shape people's beliefs in an agenda about which they may or may not have any idea. Enough said. Okay. Do your own research on these matters. Go see how often this globe is in the logo of some of the most major and, should I say, evil corporations in the world. And how often, like, even like Hollywood, for example, the Universal logo. And when you go to see a movie, it's everywhere in your face, and there's a reason for it. Okay. I'll begin part 2 with a short clip of the Apollo 11 press conference with the 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. We've all seen press conferences after, say, the Super Bowl or the recent World Series, and see how people react with unbridled joy and pride after what they consider has been a great victory. Contrast that with the reactions of the 3 astronauts in this press conference, who had supposedly just accomplished successfully the greatest feat in human history. And as you watch this press conference, see if you also get the same feeling like I did, that these guys were at their grandmother's funeral or something, not at the celebration of the greatest victory in human history. The Kansas City Royals just won the World Series, and here's 2 guys from that team describing their experience. Now, I'll just play a couple of minutes of this, and then I'm going to play Neil Armstrong and the other 2 guys from the Apollo 11 mission. And I would like, people to just pay attention and see the difference in the reactions of the guys that won a baseball game, and then these guys who supposedly came back from a 500,000-mile journey to the moon and back with their lives intact.
I didn't know there's that many people in Kansas City.
They found them somehow.
There's not, right? I mean, wow. It looks like the Pope came or something. It's unbelievable. It's just, that was fantastic. I got to say, we're very happy for you guys. But there's one meme I saw of you online. It said, on a scale of 1 to Salvador Perez, how happy are you today? Look at how happy you are. That is just the best. I mean, that's how I would be if I won the World Series, too. But,
And now the Apollo 11 press conference from 1969.
At this time, I'd like to introduce the Apollo 11 crew, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin. Neil?
It was our pleasure to have participated in one great adventure. It's an adventure that took place not just in the month of July, but rather one that took place in the last decade. We all here and the people listening in today had the opportunity to share that adventure over its developing and unfolding in the past months and years. It's our privilege today to share with you some of the details of that final month of July that was certainly the highlight for the 3 of us of that decade.
And secondly, when you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
And now here's the second and final part of my interview with Mark Sargent.
You had to you had to fake the moon landing, and I lost my other train of thought, but I'll come back to it eventually.
While you're on this topic, like
Yeah.
yesterday, by the way, was the anniversary. Yesterday, or the day before, that the space station, so-called International Space Station, has been up there for 15 years. Okay, and everybody released a bunch of pictures that they've taken over the years. And one of the things that's the commonality between that and the Apollo photos and everything is that space is always black. Okay, that
Yeah.
there are no stars.
Yeah.
Except I saw one photo in which was obviously looked like photoshops. They show this the space shuttle hanging upside down with this cargo bay doors open and blah blah. And then you see, oh, it was taken at night and it was beautiful stars in the background. Okay, so that was a shot. So it looks like somebody took a picture of the sky, pasted the space shuttle on top, and that's. But every other picture was black. There's no stars. Even at nighttime, they show this picture of the moon rising, one photo, beautiful photograph, which, by the way, because they slanted at a certain angle, was trying to create the illusion of a curve on the horizon. But when I took that photo, I flipped it over, and the horizon is absolutely flat. Okay, so but there are no stars. And this was a problem with the Apollo missions, wasn't it? With the astronauts?
You can't, if you're going to fake something. And I remembered what I was going to talk about was Astronauts Gone Wild. Let me mention that real quick, and I'll go into the stars thing, because otherwise I'll forget it because it's early. The Astronauts Wild thing really bugged me because when he was interviewed, when all the astronauts were interviewed by this one journalist who was just kind of a jerk, but which is probably why he won't talk to me when I say things like that, because he ambushed him and he was trying to like trip him up with multiple questions, and he thought of something. It's like, well, you know what, I'm just going to bring out a King James Bible and have him swear on it real quick and say, hey, by the way, swear that you went to the moon, and no one would do it. And that really bugged me. That stuck in my head for a while because it didn't make any sense. I was like, why would they care? Why would they care? Were they strong Christians? Are they Boy Scouts? Why would they not swear in the Bible? People lie under oath all the time. It's called perjury. We have an entire legal system that deals with crap like that. And they wouldn't do it. I was going, wait. And once I got into the enclosed world, though, then it made way more sense because I was going, oh, I get it. Because when you're swearing on something like that, you're not swearing on the Bible. It didn't have to be a Bible. You're swearing, if you know, because I have no doubt the Apollo astronauts knew that they were told why they were going to be faking this, and they don't tell astronauts anymore. They just tell them you're faking it, you're not don't have clearance. But with the Apollo astronauts, they told them, and they realized, like, you know what, they're not going to do anything malicious again ever in their lives, including lying. And most of them became recluses. You would think that, ticker tape parades and they'd be super happy. Look at the press conference after that first big moon mission, where they were sitting there in front of the International Press Corps. You'd think these guys would be just glowing with with basking in their own glory, and they looked like, I've never seen men that were that down. It's because they were faking something too big.
Right.
But to get to your stars point, yes, faking the moon mission. That was a problem because the computer technology wasn't available then. Now we could do it if we wanted to, because you can get the constellations. Here's the problem. If the stars aren't in the exact right place at the right time, if you take a picture and you stamp it, someone eventually is going to figure it out. Some math geek is going to figure out, it's okay, if the moon's here, the Earth's here, stars are in that corner, and they're going to basically match up the date timestamp.
Right.
With the stars. So if the belt of Orion is over the astronaut's shoulder in this picture and it's not supposed to be, someone's going to figure that out. And that is way too hard mathematically, especially in the 60s, to try to fake that, because it would be so hard to do even the major constellations behind them and get them all in the right place at the right time. No. So they just said, you know what, we're not going to deal with it at all. We're just going to have no stars in any shot, which was that was asked by the International Press Corps, and Neil Armstrong, if I'm not mistaken, almost caught himself on that because he was like wavering. He's like, oh, I don't remember seeing any. And the other two guys were like, oh, no, there were no stars. They're looking at him like, dude,
how is that possible that there are no stars? That just is something which boggles my mind. It's They tell us, you should see it much more spectacularly out there because there's no light pollution. There's it's just the blackness of space. Any source of illumination would be probably 10 times brighter than we see on Earth. No stars.
It was ridiculous. And I'll go one more, because you brought up the ISS, and I interview people on my own as well, and I interviewed an industrial valve expert. He called me up and said, "Look, I've been listening to what you've been talking about." And he goes, "Look," you know, there's very few companies in the world that actually make industrial valves. People don't know that, and these are like the seals and the valves for like, and they deal with the military, like submarines, and very very heavy stuff
Right.
with the pressure. And he goes, the ISS, from an engineering standpoint, is impossible. It cannot be doing what they're saying they're doing, because the seals, the tolerances between the chambers, because remember, it's a vacuum out in space. There should be quite a bit of pressure there. He's going, it should not be possible. And he broke it down for me. Everyone wants to listen. I've got a YouTube video on it that talks about industrial valve expert. It says that the ISS is a lie. And he says there should be a full-blown machine shop. There should be maintenance all the time. When you see footage of the inside of the ISS, there should be people with, covered in grease and with tools running around constantly doing maintenance, right? And all you see is people in dockers and polo shirts and socks,
Right.
just floating around like there's not a care in the world. Oh, everything's fine. Oh yeah, look at our vacuum toilet. Nobody cares about the maintenance side of it, and in fact, they did the anniversary show on the ISS just recently, and they were saying, and somebody asked him, "It's like, what about maintenance?" He's going, "Oh yeah, not much maintenance difference between 5 years ago and now." It's like, five years, and it's like anything. The parts break down. He laid it out in great detail, this industrial expert, and said, things break down. He goes, I don't care what is used. If there's
look at how much aircraft, how much they have, the maintenance they have to go through after even one or two transcontinental flights or whatever. They have to basically be.
And airplanes don't take chances. That's a neat thing. I actually follow in my life a lot of the ways the airplane replaces parts. People with cars, we wait till things wear out, right? But in planes, you can't do that. So planes, it comes down to age. It's like, this part has been used for a number of hours. We don't care what it looks like. It's getting swapped out. Because it reduces the odds of failure. And the ISS, he goes, there should be a mountain of parts that just keeps getting sent up there on a regular basis. And the submarine guy that I interviewed, he did the same thing. He goes, look, he goes, I don't know how exactly they're dealing with the atmospheric pressure. How are they constantly cycling the air? He goes, I don't care.
That's a good question. Where does the air come from?
Yeah, he goes, I don't, on submarines, they have a lot more room and a lot more power to deal with. They can actually generate,
from the
oxygen.
Water, they can generate air. I can understand that. But if there's no atmosphere up there, where's the air coming from?
Yeah, there's way too much oxygen need to do that. And not only that, there's the one thing which people are, maybe they're not getting this entirely. It's like, okay, here's another thing to look at. You have the space station, which is basically compartment, right? There's no doors between these compartments. There's holes, but there's no hatches. Like on a submarine, there should be heavy aluminum type doors with glass. What happened to all the hatches? And the reason is, from a production standpoint, you don't want to slow down, because if you're faking this in zero-G gravity, if you're using the zero-G planes, by the way, that's a whole nother thing, and that is why isn't any part of the space station bigger, any wider than a commercial airplane.
747 or whatever they use.
Exactly.
Yeah,
to fake it in zero-G, because there's no planes bigger right now that can do that. But from a production standpoint, you can't have people opening and shutting doors, because it slows down the whole process. So their answer was, well, just take out the doors. It's like, where did you put them? Where are the doors? To all the and you're saying you're walking around there with in socks and slacks and a polo shirt. What happens if a micrometeor hits? If you've got no doors, that whole station's gone.
Right.
It's not like compartment after compartment. You'd think they'd play it a little safer. Sorry, that bugs me almost as much as the guys playing golf on the moon, which was why would you, if I'm on there, all I care about is how much oxygen I have and how quick can I get out of there.
Right.
I would not be playing golf. I would not be singing and running around and driving in moon
Or even
buggies.
like the way they were jumping up and down. What happens if you fall down and you rip your suit or something, right?
Oh, and they did fall down several times. If I fell, I'd be the first thing I'd do would just check my suit to make sure there was nothing wrong. They didn't care about anything. They got way too lax, and the production value suffered for it. So,
by the way, on this space station, I saw this little video which had a very interesting point. If it's traveling at 17,000 miles an hour, which they tell us it is, how do they do these untethered spacewalks or even tethered spacewalks?
Yeah.
You got this craft going by 17,000. You suppose you're out there doing this space. So how does that work? I don't get it.
Yeah, huge amounts of speed. Everything that science has told us and NASA has told us involves massive amounts of speeds, including the ISS and every spacewalk. By the way, why did they shut down the space shuttle program several years ago? Why shut that in entirely? Why let private corporations try and fail most of the time? Although I heard SpaceX supposedly actually delivered some parts after doing crash after crash. We don't know why. It's the whole system. It's almost like, I kid you not, people think I'm joking. It's almost like they want to get caught because they're not putting effort. They're phoning it in basically at this point. And every story, and I know they're getting nervous. Either they're getting nervous or they want to get caught, because the number of stories that have been released this year by NASA, it used to be like once every couple weeks, but now it's like every other day. It's just been blatant. The pictures, it's like, oh, we're doing something on Mars. Oh yeah, here's Pluto. Here's what's going on with Saturn. Let's do something fun for Halloween. Here's an asteroid that looks like a skull, and it's going to fly by on Halloween. And by the way, the solar flares in the sun look like a jack-o'-lantern, also on Halloween. It's like, come on, don't. And the picture that they released, the blue marble shot after 43 years in the end of July. If you turn it upside down in the northeast corner, it spells out sex in clouds. That's got Disney written all over it. That's an old Disney trick of hiding little messages like that in there. It just drove me insane. So yeah, anyway, I could go on and rant about NASA.
All right, so let's so basically what we've discussed so far is that NASA itself is not just a moon program. Program, by the way, is an interesting word here, as in mind control, as in programming. Sure. Everything is a program that's thrown at you through TV, through whatever information systems we have, to program you to think into a certain way, to believe certain things. And the space program and NASA and the Apollo program, they certainly are big in that department. Okay, now getting back to the flat Earth, so you talked about Richard E. Byrd, that he was this famous explorer who had actually gone on national television to say, how all these, not just nations, but corporations, everything is going to be just making a beeline for the Antarctic because there's so many resources there, and then boom, all of a sudden the ice curtain, you could call it, came down, and nobody's allowed there anymore.
Yep.
Okay. So what's the next big clue you would say?
The next big clue, let's just jump right to it, which would be the flights in the southern hemisphere. The map being wrong. And I've got experts that have come out and pretty much corroborated it.
Okay, now let's correct this here. Like, if there is no globe, there is no southern hemisphere.
There is no southern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere becomes the outer ring of a dinner plate.
Right. Okay, go on.
So if it's not a globe, if the Earth is flat, then something happens from a map standpoint. There are certain inconsistencies. Now, if you look from the top down, for example, and this was kind of a fun one, because I was looking at trying to figure out what the map projection would be like. And I was looking on Wikipedia. Again, none of this information is secret. You can all look it up, which is the from the top down, there's a map projection called the azimuthal, AZIMUTHL, equidistant map. And it is basically, if you took a globe and put your hand on the North Pole and flattened it, that's what it would look like. The continents would kind of spread out, and it looks way more elegant, by the way. But what happens is everything from the equator outwards becomes more exaggerated. The distances become exaggerated. And this map was really, really intriguing because the azimuthal equidistant map is used by the USGS, the United States Geological Survey. And the whole map was created, the whole concept of the map was created 1,000 years ago by a Persian scientist named Al-Biruni, B-I-R-U-N-I. That's the short version of his name. He has a long Middle Eastern name. But it was created 1,000 years ago, and I was going, well, that's kind of odd. Why? And because I was looking at all the map projections, this is the only one that had these weird little annotations next to it. And thinking, well, who's Al-Biruni and who cares? And why would the United States government be using a map projection in their catalog of maps of the world? And NASA knows full well who this guy was because they named a moon crater after him. It's called the Al-Biruni crater. It's like, why would they name a moon crater after a Persian scientist? Well, probably because I'll even take it one step further. We'll take one more quick NASA connection. We'll go back into maps, and that is everyone's heard of Wernher von Braun. You know, the creator of NASA, the ex-Nazi rocket scientist who basically founded NASA. You know,
by the way, this would be a good. Sorry to interrupt, but the NASA itself is basically a Nazi creation, is it not? Like,
it was built on the backs of not even the ashes, the hot embers of the Nazi war machine. When we're not dumb. When the Russians and the Americans took Germany, there was a lot of intel, a lot of high tech. They had a lot of advanced stuff that we still can't figure out to this day. Well, at least not publicly, how they got it. And so the Russians and the Americans basically divvied up the scientists and said, you get yours. And because their rocket program was so far ahead of ours. But we got one of the big guys, which was Wernher von Braun. Wernher von Braun, when he died in the 70s, he has a very modest headstone. You can look it up online. Just Google Wernher von Braun headstone. He's got it's his name, his date, date, birth, death, and a single Bible verse, Psalms 19:1, or I think it's 19:1, which
the heavens declare the glory of God.
But one translation of that is the firmament declares the glory. Shows his handiwork.
Firmament that's in the King James. That firmament shows his handiwork. Yes.
It's like, why would a rocket scientist, the rocket scientist, put that on his headstone? Why would he do that? It's like, really, you're gonna throw that breadcrumb out there? Wait till it's like, hand somebody an envelope. When I die, put this on my headstone. There's not some big statue of him pointing towards the stars or a big statue of a rocket or anything. It's just a very modest headstone with that verse on it. I thought that was very, very telling.
Very interesting. Yeah.
So back to the maps. The azimuthal equidistant map, which was used by the United States Geological Survey, happens to also be identical to the United Nations flag, which was designed in 1946. Very, very interesting, because literally if you lay one on top of the other, and I did this with slides, they're identical. But there's something missing with the United Nations flag, and that is there's no Antarctica on it.
Right.
Antarctica does not exist on this flag. Why would you do this? In the United Nations, you could do any logo you want. A couple globes, one showing Antarctica. It's a big continent, supposedly. It's bigger than Australia. Yeah, fine. There's not many people living on it, but you're not going to include that in the United Nations. Who says one day you're not going to enclose all the land masses of the world? Nor do they talk about it. They don't even explain why it's not on the map. All they have is the azimuthal map with these big wreaths going around it, kind of like giant ice barrier. And you're thinking, okay, why are you going on about the flags? Well, here's the thing. The azimuthal map used by the United States government, the UN flag used by the United Nations, and the flat earth map, go figure, by the Flat Earth Society, they're all the same map. Only two of them are considered legitimate maps. One's a projection. One is a full-blown flag, but the flat earth map is considered insane because the flat earth people say it's literal.
Right.
Whereas the azimuthal map is considered a projection. So, but they don't, and it's not linkable. Here's the other thing, and that is when you look at the flat earth map, in Wiki, there's no direct link back to the azimuthal map. It's a standalone map. Why wouldn't you talk about this as a projection? Why wouldn't these two be linked? It was ridiculous. So anyway, the southern hemisphere on this map becomes exaggerated. And someone had told me, going back to what we started out with, someone told me that the flights in the southern hemisphere look wrong. They don't make any sense. And I was looking them up, and yes, indeed, they do look wrong. And so like in the northern hemisphere where we are, we can get nonstop flights all day long. We can get it's just a question of how much money you want to pay and what time you have to get up in the morning or to get a nonstop flight. But in the southern hemisphere, between, say, South America and Australia, a lot of people in South America, a lot of people in Australia, there are some cities, capital cities, you cannot get nonstops to from anywhere, in South America to Australia. There are, and people were driving me nuts on this one because they said, look, doesn't it bother anybody? There's no nonstops down there. All these flights, right? If you want to go like from Buenos Aires to like Sydney, Australia, it should be, by the way, a straight shot across the South Pacific Ocean. just fly across the South Pacific. It's not that hard. But none of these, almost all these flights take these weird connections. They go through the Middle East. So Buenos Aires would like go northeast into the Middle East, go to Dubai, go to wherever else you need to go, and then go back down to Australia. And the mileage would be double what you would expect. And in fact, sometimes if you're flying from South America to somewhere down there, you'd be going north, like through America. Like there were connections that were going through Los Angeles and San Francisco and Dallas. It didn't make any sense. I was going, why would you? And they're saying, well, we were picking up people. I'm just going, no, you wouldn't. You're not going to pick up people and double your flight time. That's not the point. You just do something else. People from Los Angeles, they'd fly down there. You're not going to pick up anybody that far. But when you look on a flat map, when you take it from a globe and you put those flights on a flat map, those big arcing flights don't become arcs anymore. They almost become shallow dog legs, and in some cases become straight lines. And the coincidence of that happening is way out of bounds for me. But then there were still people that were saying, well, even though I thought that they would be bothered by the fact there's no nonstops in the Southern Hemisphere. They said everyone kept mentioning there was like 5 flights, and one of them, the biggest, like Qantas Flight 64. Oh my God, I had so many emails saying, "No, there's a nonstop flight. There's a nonstop flight." I'm just going, fine, I will look into it and figure out what's going on. Here's the problem with the nonstop flights, and there's only, I'm not kidding you, there's only like 5 in the entire Southern Hemisphere. It doesn't make any sense. Millions of people flying. There's like supposedly 8,000 planes in the air any given time during the day, and there's no nonstop flights. So here's the problem. When I started looking on the GPS, I started staring at the screen, watching these planes leave from, let's say, somewhere in South America, heading across the South Pacific. They get about 152 miles, 200 miles offshore, and they just vanish. They just blink off the GPS screen. And people, we have technology now. You can go online, especially with the internet, and you can look up like planefinder.net, planefinder.com, Flight Tracker, Flight Aware, all these planes. You can watch these things in real time. They get over the ocean and they vanish. And I didn't get this for a while because I was following a plane. I'd go get something to eat. I'd come back and the plane would be gone. I'm going, fine, I'll watch another plane. And I watched plane after plane after plane, and they all disappear. And when I finally started looking up the details on these planes, they would go into either approximated mode or estimated mode, and they would stay literally off the radar until maybe an hour before touchdown. They'd pop back in, and then they'd land. I thought, wow, that's really, really interesting. And then it sort of dawned on me. It's like, oh, of course, that's what you would want to do, because on a flat map, there are some routes that you can't let people know how you got there. And so when people say, well, there's nonstop flights, I'm going, fine, show me how the plane got there. Show me the route, because there is no tracking. The planes are disappeared in the Southern Hemisphere, and only in the Southern Hemisphere. So basically what I'm saying is the 3 big oceans, the South Pacific, the South Atlantic, and the Indian Oceans in the Southern Hemisphere are not being tracked. And I initially thought when I made the clues was that they were being turned off deliberately to hide the routes. And then people were coming back at me more and more as this thing has evolved over the last 9 months. People have come back to me and say, no, it's not because this is not being turned off. It's that there's no coverage. Meaning right. there's no system in place. So even though the GPS system supposedly holds 24 satellites, and it's a global positioning system, hence the name, designed by the United States Department of Defense from the 1990s, even though there should be tracking, it's their satellites. There's no dead spots. There are massive dead spots in the Southern Hemisphere, because if there are no satellites, then there's no way to track those big things, because there's not enough islands to put tower systems in, and the Loran system, the existing military Loran system, can't go down that far or can't go out that far. There's just too much area to cover and not enough repeaters. And anyone can check this. It is easy, and it's extremely suspicious. So basically their answer to one of the things to keeping this a secret was you hide all the plane routes in the Southern Hemisphere over water, because you don't want people to know how they got from one place to another. So yeah, they could probably, if they want to, spend the money and get mobile air stations, AWACS, and have them flying all over the place and try to figure it out. But they figure, you know what, no one's going to notice, so let's see how long we can get away with it. So they just do it with software. And they say, oh yeah, sure, you can see the little plane graphic, and some stations it's going across, but if you actually look at it, you have no idea. It says it's just estimated. It's a phantom. the plane is not there. The route that it's taking, it cannot be proven. So people say, "Oh, I flew from," and the reason why nobody's noticed so long is, yeah, you get off. I'll give you the one that people kept giving me was the Santiago, Chile to Auckland, New Zealand. People gave me that one all the time, and yeah, if you get on the plane in Santiago, you land in Auckland, hey, you made it, right?
Right.
Most people, but you can't tell me the route. That's why nobody's noticed up until now. It's all been hidden in plain sight. It's been brilliant. This thing has been hidden for the last 60 years in different ways, and only now, with the internet detection ability that we have, only now have we seemed to finally, the detection ability has caught up. We're finding we can microscope everything so much better now, and so we're finding the cracks.
Well, this is not just in modern times. This is also going back 100, 200 years, that ships in the southern part of the world, there have been literally tens of thousands of reports that their navigation systems didn't function like they expected them to based on a globe model. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the ship would consider, and like some of the very famous explorers wrote about this, that they expected to be at a certain point based on their charts, and they found themselves, miles and miles and miles in every day, like,
Yeah.
further away from where they thought they were going to be. So
Yeah.
yes, so there is truth in that. And then also shipping lanes, I think, are also very carefully controlled.
Yeah.
Cargo ships, for example, they have to follow a certain path only. It's not that they can wander off into the South Pacific, because we don't know what's in the South Pacific or South Atlantic or whatever.
Yeah.
So yes, so those things are interesting. I'm not 100% sold on this flight information yet, because there are direct flights from certain points, and the southern hemisphere, being that it is a southern part of the world, Latin America,
Sure.
they have more travel between, say, Brazil and Europe, for example, than they would towards Australia, because they're not English speaking. So there's certain aspects that we have to take into consideration. But it is definitely, like, more and more of these anomalies keep popping
Yeah.
up. That
I'll give you one more, because you mentioned the shipping lanes, and that was, I interviewed a missile instructor who had done a big tour on an amphibious assault ship, and he was saying that the fleet, when they were doing fleet maneuvers, when they got down, which was really strange, they'd be in the southern part of South America, and you'd think they would just keep going and go around the Horn and come back up to the South Atlantic. And he goes, almost always, in fact he said always, they would turn them around and they would go through the Panama Canal, even though if you looked on a map,
right.
it is like, why don't we just go around the Horn? Why would you absolutely backtrack and go that much farther? And that's because on a flat map, the distances shrink as you get closer to the inner circle.
Right.
And so going up to the Panama Canal actually would be shorter. Oh, I'll take one more for you. That woman just recently who had the baby on the flight that got rerouted to Alaska, that miracle birth. And that was, she was going from Bali to Chicago, and I think it was going over Hawaii, over Los Angeles, and then up to Chicago. And they were, if you look on the map, they were like fairly close to Hawaii. It was 6 hours in from Bali, or out of Bali, and it was, they were close to Hawaii. Why not land in Hawaii? And they went almost due northeast, and landed in Alaska, and had the baby in Anchorage, Alaska. Didn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, that would not make sense. Yeah.
But if you put it on a flat map, it's a straight line. They were actually going near Alaska anyway, because in the northern hemisphere, they still have to do some weird stuff with the flights. And it turns out when you look at their flight path, they were actually going to be not that far from Alaska. So they just kind of, made a left-hand turn, and they're right there in Anchorage anyway. It was amazing. So in the news, it looked, oh yeah, they had to divert the flight, but that wasn't true. In the real course, they were going to be near Alaska. It was just amazing. Again, hidden in plain sight. Just brilliant, brilliant stuff.
Now, we have flights in the northern part that go over the North Pole all the time, which makes sense when you look at the map that, if you're leaving from, Toronto and you want to fly, for example, to Beijing or something, and you can go right over because they would be facing each other, and then, you're over there and you end up there. And so when you look at the map, and if Buenos Aires, for example, and Sydney or Australia, they're on opposite ends on a globe, then you should be able to fly right over the South Pole and get there the shortest distance. That would be the shortest time. But you have. Has anybody ever circumnavigated Antarctica?
As far as we know, no. In fact, that's one of the tests that we've been hoping for the longest time, which is it's it is, I came up with it some months ago, which is there's only one way to really prove without, you know, getting NASA involved or some sort of space program, and that is on a flat map versus the globe, there's one real disparity, and that is the coastline of Antarctica.
Right.
Because on a flat map, that coastline is going to be much, much larger, much longer. And so my idea was take some plane. You're going to need a point of reference, though. So you either need two ships going, one going clockwise, the other going counterclockwise, and eventually they would meet. Or you need a ship, stationary ship, and then you have a plane just flying either clockwise or counterclockwise, and eventually it would pass by that ship again. But truthfully, with the ships, if the map is right, they're never going to run into each other because they'd have to refuel so many times, because it would be thousands, you know, tens and tens of thousands of miles around. It would be almost impossible by ship, but a plane could do it if they wanted to, but the Antarctic Defense Force, and you can't get close. You'd also have to bypass the GPS system, because the GPS system works for the powers that are hiding this. So you would have to have a plane that would be within visual range of the coastline at all times.
Right,
and I don't know if you could do it. Because they try to keep you away, you know, unauthorized flights. They've locked this thing down fairly tight over the years.
So you would need the involvement of the powers that be, and they, of course, they're not going to grant that. So then we have to take their word that this is how it is. The way the image or the picture that they're giving us, you know, we are supposed to believe it, that this is how it is, because there's no way for us to go down there and check it out for ourselves.
Agreed. It's so fascinating right now, and I love the way it's going. I mean, again, we've only been doing this now for I put out the clues in February, and it's now November. It's amazing how fast it's taken off.
Now, you mentioned this missile instructor, which I listened to that show, and it was an excellent show. That's one of the first shows that I heard about this, and that's what kind of got me thinking.
Sure.
And the point that he raised was that there is a formula that has been given by the powers that be that should allow us to calculate the curvature of the Earth. Okay. Yeah. So he is telling me that he was saying that in the Navy, he never saw that, and in their navigation, they don't take that curvature into account. Is that correct?
No, they don't. The curvature formula that science, and anyone can look this up, the supposed curvature of Earth, where we are, is 8 inches per mile squared, which means, if you want to break it down, because people hear that and they just start glazing over. It's like, oh, I hate that. It's trig, isn't it? It's like, no. It's 8 inches per mile, every mile you travel times itself. So the first mile should be 8 inches of curve, 8 inches of drop. The second mile is 2 times 2, which is 4, times 8, which is 32 inches. And it just keeps getting more and more exaggerated. So 3 times 3 is 9, times 8 is 72, and it goes on from there. So as you get further out, it's steeper and steeper, because eventually it's going to go vertical, and it's going to drop off entirely, like standing on top of a basketball. If you're an ant, basically,
right.
You can. And so what happens there is, he's saying, so at, let's say, for example, we'll just say 50 miles. 50 miles is 50 times 50 times 8 inches, which is pushing about 1,700 feet. That's a lot of feet, which means that if you have an object that's less than 1,700 feet tall, you shouldn't be able to see any of it if you're at ground level, because it's below the curvature of the Earth. It's on. Think of it like on the other side of a hill. And he was saying, well, that doesn't make any sense, because we're using 2-inch beam radar, which can basically, what he's saying is that, because the reason why he came on is he's a missile instructor, and he deals with the Sparrow missile system. And with a Sparrow missile system, you literally have to paint the target. It's not a fully blown guided system. You have to paint the target with a laser, or in this case, it's a beam radar, a 2-inch beam radar. You have to paint the side of the ship, whatever target you're going to shoot at, and keep it painted while the missile's in the air. That way the missile can follow it. He goes, the problem is, is it worth shooting these beam radars out at about 50 nautical miles, which is 60 plus land miles, statute miles? He goes, that's 2,000 plus feet below the horizon. He's going, that beam should not be able to hit the ship. And we're hitting it no problem whatsoever. It's not like we have to compensate for anything. We're just we're shooting a straight line 60 miles long. He goes, that isn't possible on a globe. It cannot happen. That beam should just go straight into the water and do it fairly early. It should do it at like 10 miles. Forget about 60 miles. And he goes, look, the tech we are using, he not only is he an operator of the system, he trains people and he knows everything about that system. He goes, it does not, he goes, nothing that he saw indicated a curve at all. In fact, he touched on all three. You know, first he touched on the curve, which basically says, well, let me do the, for people that don't want to deal with the whole envisioning the beam radar, the Chicago skyline was a perfect one, and that is the Chicago skyline from the other side of the lake is about 50 miles across. But if the atmosphere is just about right, if it's a clear day, you can see the full-blown Chicago skyline. That's about 1,600, 1,700 feet. There's no building in Chicago that's even close, and you can see the whole skyline. You can see buildings that are only a couple hundred feet high. That isn't possible, and yet the weatherman comes on, and we've got this on video on YouTube. The weatherman comes on and says, oh yeah, it's a mirage. It's like, okay, if that's a mirage, you can't pick and choose here, which means you can't say that, oh yeah, we can show a ship going below the horizon, which doesn't happen, it's distortion. That's real. But the Chicago skyline at 50 miles, that's a mirage. It's like, no. You can't have one without the other. Either they're both real or they're both mirages. Yeah. And you can't do it. So the missile guy was wonderful. I'm so glad he came forward and talked about this. So he's basically saying, yeah, we have technology the average person doesn't, and nothing shows a curve at all. That between the beam radar and the gyro system, which he goes, look, we spin that thing up, the gyro system, which is the same in a plane, the same in a submarine, and I've talked to all three of those guys. He's going, that gyro does not move. That gyro does not compensate for a curve. The gyro only works on a flat plane. He goes, if we're on a curve, a gyro system is eventually just going to keep pulling you up because it's set on a flat plane. He goes, our courses would be constantly off. Not only that, let me throw one more in there at you, because the other point, which I love just as much, was the Coriolis effect, which basically says we have to compensate for the Earth spinning when it comes to shooting things in the air. And we've all heard recently, all the war stories. It's like, well, this sniper had to shoot when he shot a mile. He had to compensate for the Coriolis effect. That is a bunch of crap. Not only do I have a sniper instructor on record saying that we've never taught this ever, but that's only 1 mile. I had an artillery guy from Fallujah saying at 30 miles, we're not using the Coriolis effect. We're not compensating for the shells. And then Sean, the missile instructor, he comes on, he goes, yeah, we're shooting targets at 60 miles. We're not using the Coriolis effect either. Nobody's using this Coriolis effect. It doesn't exist. The spinning of the Earth isn't used in it. We all hear about it. That was the big thing. We all hear about it in books and this and that, but it's never used in real world. It's not used in a practical sense.
See, that's the one. Since I've started looking at this, like I said, I only looked at it for about a month now, so I can't say I'm no expert by any means, but that was the one thing that really hit me, is this idea that this curvature can be measured and it can be done by average people, and we can, using their own formula, certain things should happen, but they do not. And same thing with this Coriolis effect, it does not, in all practical applications, it does not happen. And about the curvature, in the 19th century in England, they passed a law that, whenever they're doing surveys to build railways or to build canals, the curvature should not be taken into account because it was messing all their design up. Because they were trying to build canals, taking this curvature into effect, and it was screwing them up. So they passed a law saying, no, in all surveys, and this is still true, I believe, to this day worldwide, that they do not, for long stretches where they're building a railway or something, they don't take it into account.
Excellent point. You probably listened to the surveyor guy I had on briefly.
Yes, very good program.
The surveyor, he comes on, a career surveyor, land surveyor, 32 years, retired now, and he did big tracts of land. He didn't do just your average home. He did malls, auto plants, airport runways, big tracts of land. And all of a sudden it hit him, actually, after listening to the missile guy, that he realized that after 32 years, he never had to account for the curve in anything that he ever shot. And he was like, how did I miss this? How did I not shoot a curve? Because he realized once he's looked at the bigger picture, and that is, if you think of shooting, when you're surveying a piece of land, he said, look, we're just creating it like a big book, like a big flat square book, right? Only it's got weird edges. But he's going, here's the problem. That book has to match up with the guy next to me's book, and behind me, in front of me, all these people are doing surveyors all over the place. He goes, well, the curvature, yeah, fine, it's only 8 inches a mile, but that curvature does have to be accounted for. Sure. Eventually, it has to be taken into account. These pieces have to match up. I was trying to give people an analogy. I go, try covering like a ball, like a beach ball or a basketball, with little square crackers. Eventually, it's going to fit, but the only way to fit it perfectly is you have to use curved pieces, and the surveyors do not. The surveyors are taught in all their books. They said, treat the world like it's a flat plane. Every piece of land that you're working on, treat it like it's perfectly flat. And he goes, even by accident, when you're working up one project next to another, like a 10-mile stretch versus another 10-mile stretch, somebody, when they butt up these two pieces next to each other, there should be a problem. There should be an overlap. And there isn't. He goes, even by accident, he goes, well, didn't you take the curvature into your plot? Oh, no, did you? Nobody even talks about it. Right. In fact, the thing that, here's the great part, he goes, they said, like when the new surveyors come out and they say, well, what about the curvature stuff? Oh, they say, well, you got to look at the markers in the book. That'll account for it. There's this big map, this thing with these markers on it. And it's like, and he goes, but you know who made that? He goes, you know who made that book with all the markers on it? And I go, no. He goes, the USGS. Right. United States Geological Survey. He goes, they're the ones that say, oh yeah, here's a book that'll account for your curvature thing, even though they don't. It's a complete myth. The surveyor thing was great. So basically what he's saying is, from a simple surveying standpoint, they talk about it. It's like, oh yeah, you'll eventually, it's like a paragraph. It's like, oh yeah, you'll deal with the curvature. But in practical use, your 9-to-5 job, he goes, it's never, ever, ever used.
So what you're saying is that, this is an interesting point, and I think I want to stress it a little bit. Like if you take a big ball, like a beach ball, and you try to build Lego on it, okay, for those pieces to fit perfectly, straight pieces cannot fit. So you would either have to put some wedges in it or something at every interval to make this, let's say, build a railway track around it or something. It would have to be different shapes. But when they build these long, and you have seen these warehouses or whatever that get stretched for miles, you can put them all one next to each other and they'll fit perfectly.
He says, look at your average city, from one end of the city to the other. Think of how many different surveying projects are part of that city. Right. And in all directions. He's going, all those pieces matched up perfectly from a two-dimensional standpoint. He goes, can't happen. It absolutely cannot happen. And he was absolutely right. Oh, I'll take it one for you. And that is, I had a industrial oil pipeline guy called me the other day. Oh yeah, right. That's a good example. And he said, look, I absolutely know everything about those pipes that goes from, hundreds of miles in any direction. He goes, we don't do anything special to fit anything, because he goes, it's just like the railroads. He's going, eventually those railroad ties you're going to have to deal with it. And nobody ever does.
You have to bend them at some point to compensate for the curve.
Yeah, like you said, there's going to have to be a wedge at some point or another, and it's never ever done.
See, these are simple things which kind of are convincing me that this is the way it is, because where I live, I'm about maybe say 25 miles from downtown Toronto, and Toronto's a big city like Chicago, okay, and it's also on the lake. And I'm kind of up in an elevated area, which it's pretty flat all around, but it's a little bit of an elevation. So where I am, you can see clear across 25 miles to downtown Toronto, and Toronto's biggest landmark is the CN Tower, and the CN Tower is straight, like a Saturn V rocket or something. It's not. You should see it curved like at that distance, and behind the downtown you can see Lake Ontario. And I'm sure on a clear day, if you had a telescope, you could probably look right onto Niagara Falls, which would be like 100 miles away or something. So, so where's the curve? I don't see it.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely agree. In fact, there's more and more people coming out because there's water in the ocean, or
Right.
there's water bodies wherever. There's a guy in Hawaii, out on one of the islands. He was shooting one of the smaller islands. He goes, look, this is 90 miles away. 90 miles should be X number of feet. He goes, the highest point on that entire island is way below what that curve should be.
Right, it should be.
He goes, I shouldn't see this island. And for anyone, it's the easiest thing to test. If you're out there, just find a body of water, do the Google Map thing, and do the distance, and take a picture for yourself. But people are catching on.
One of the things which I found interesting was that when you get into some sort of discussion with anybody about this, they keep, oh yeah, that's like old 19th century science. But most of this science built, like the Panama Canal or all these major dams, bridges, they were all built using 19th century science. So
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the science worked. And none of that they took into consideration. None of those took into consideration. The Suez Canal, I read, is 100 miles long, but they don't have a single lock on it. The Nile River runs for 1,000 miles, and it only drops 1 foot.
Oh,
How is that possible?
I'll take even an older one than that. Somebody sent me, because I get the best emails from people that say, hey, have you looked in this? I learn new stuff literally every day. He said, look at the Roman aqueducts.
Right.
The Romans didn't know anything about the curvature of the earth. He's going, how did they get the aqueducts to run such huge, long tracts of land with such a shallow slope without that slope becoming irrelevant? But without that slope all of a sudden going up, and then the water isn't going anywhere.
Right.
How did that happen? Did they really account for the curvature of the earth? I doubt it.
And also, it's like too many too many questions about the spin of the earth, which I don't even want to get into here because I guess we could go on forever. But nobody feels the spin. Like all the things that they tell us are happening, like they're spinning, but you don't feel it. We are moving through space at 65,000 miles an hour, but nobody sees any wind rushing by them or nothing like that.
I'll give people the merry-go-round analogy, which is when it comes to the spin of the earth, it's no different than a merry-go-round, right?
Right.
So we've all been in a merry-go-round and a playground. If you're on the outside of the merry-go-round, it tries to throw you off if it goes fast enough. And if you're at the center of the merry-go-round, well, you're just going in a circle. Nothing really happens. There's nothing happening. Well, if you're on a globe, it's really not that much different. So if you're on the equator, you're supposedly spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. But if you're on the North Pole, you're spinning at 0 miles an hour. There's a problem there, and that is centrifugal force says it's going to try to counteract gravity if you're on a sphere. So if you're on the center, the equator, 1,000 miles an hour, it's going to try to slightly pull you off. So if you take a 100-pound weight, and this is a test I'd love to do if anyone ever wants to finance it, if you take a 100-pound weight at the North Pole, it'll weigh 100 pounds. But if you take it down to the equator, it should weigh slightly less because it's trying to throw you. Yeah, it should try to throw you off. So there's two forces counteracting forces at that point. So yeah, maybe that 100-pound weight doesn't weigh 90 pounds. Maybe it doesn't even weigh even a pound less, but it's going to be measurable. We have the detection capability. It's like, well, it's so slow, 1,000 miles an hour, it takes 24 hours to go around. It's like, it's still centrifugal force. You should be able to measure some of it. And, nobody wants to talk about that. It's, and I don't know how much time we have, but let me throw one more out to you, because people say, what's the big question you want to throw out at NASA or the space agencies or anything? For me, the big monkey in the room, the big gorilla, is the Van Allen belts, which is announced in 1959 as the deadliest thing ever, and because it's a trick question, it's a trap. You can't win this argument either way, which is deadliest things ever, right? Unfortunately, in 1959, when they announced them, they didn't know anything about radiation, and only now later did we figure out that the only things that can really block radiation, the two common metals, are lead, which we wear at the dentist's office, and gold, which is twice as dense as lead. Well, there's a problem there, and that is you can't put these things on capsules because they're super heavy. You can't fly an anchor. You don't want to put this giant heavy thing on top of a capsule. So how did you get all those missions, Apollo 8 through Apollo 17, round trips through the radiation belt? What shielding did you use? How did you get through them? You went round trips through these round trips, there and back. Nobody died. Nobody got radiation poisoning. Nobody got cancer. The capsules weren't contaminated. They should have been glowing. They're in the Smithsonian. Nothing's wrong with them. And you're thinking, well, and there are people saying, well, maybe the Van Allen radiation belts weren't that big a deal. Well, if that's true, then why is the 2015 Orion program, which you can look it up, it's on one of my playlists, the NASA makes a video saying, oh yeah, the first things we're going to do with Orion aren't going to be manned because we're still trying to figure out what to deal with the radiation. It's like, what are you talking about trying to deal with the radiation? You went through it. How many missions is that? 9, 10 missions through the Valerian Belt? How did you get through it? And so they're stuck either way. Either it's real or it's not real, but either way, it's a fake. So basically, they shot themselves in the foot in 1959 because they announced this thing, trying to keep the private corporations from doing anything. And then when they went, they didn't explain how they got through it.
Right.
It's like, well, fine, if it's a miracle technology, if it's a classified technology, just say it's classified. That's all you have to say. You don't have to say anything special. They didn't even do that. They just said, they just trailed off. Didn't even talk about it. Just kills me.
There's an interesting point about these radiation belts. Okay, like if you ever turn on a microwave, for example, and you're trying to talk on a cell phone or even like on a cordless phone, the signal becomes it interferes with the signal, right? You probably heard that, right?
Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Crackly. So how the heck did the moon did they send those signals back to Earth if they had to pass through these massive radiation belts?
Yeah.
Would that not interfere with their radio communications and with their television communication? But everything came out fine, Neil Armstrong landing on the moon and the whole 9 yards.
And that last, not to beat up NASA too badly, but that last thing from Apollo 17 where the camera was actually watching the capsule take off from the moon back up into space. And I actually had to download and watch the Tom Hanks production from the Earth to the Moon, an HBO miniseries. I caught that, and I was going, "Who's running that camera?" Right? It's a color remote controlled camera with a tilt, right? And apparently Houston was running that camera. They actually show that it's like, oh yeah, and he got lucky. It's like, really, a remote control camera being run by Houston with a time delay, and you've got that thing perfectly in frame all the way up, really? That's not a chance. Not a chance. And the image was what? Beamed back electronically? On top of that, it wasn't film. That was a color image that you really what broadcasting technology did you have on that? It wasn't just a camera. What transmitter was on that thing that actually shot? Oh, I'm sorry. The Apollo stuff it's in hindsight, I don't blame him. A lot of the 60s stuff, watch any 60s television movie or any movie, any television show, it has not aged well. And that's, meanwhile, 2001 Space Odyssey has aged extremely well.
It has, yeah.
Watch that on Blu-ray. It's still gorgeous to this day. Well, in fact, when they're closing in on the moon, I watched that not that long ago. And when they're closing in on the moon and it's that close-up kind of shot of the moon, it's gorgeous. I'm looking on the screen. I'm looking for pixelation. I'm looking for anything. I was going, wow, he really did a nice job. And
I'll have to watch that again. But one of the famous lines out of that, stars. Remember the guy? He saw stars.
Oh, it's full of stars.
Stars, yeah.
Yeah. The last line of the movie. It's that's very, very interesting. And again, I'll throw the Kubrick thing in there. I'll bounce people around. Where I believe the story, and the documentary is brilliant, where Kubrick, because he was a very, very smart man, built in his confession into the 1980 movie, which he directed called
The Shining,
The Shining. I watched that thing and I didn't get it like anyone. I just thought it was a creepy movie. Hide it in a horror movie. And it was brilliant what he did there. It's so many, room 237, really, even though there was no 237 in that hotel, 237,000 miles to the moon, the moon room keychain, the kid with the sweater. The sweater, I even caught something that the documentary guy didn't catch, which was this 6-year-old kid or whatever he was is wearing that homemade Apollo 11 sweater, right?
Right.
Well, the thing was the movie was set in real time, which would have been 1980. So when did his mom make that sweater for him?
Right.
Because it was perfectly fit him. She would have made him that year. It's like, what? She made an Apollo 11 sweater, years after the moon program was shut down? No, it was brilliant. It was a great thing. So yeah, Kubrick, look him up.
Well, Mark, thank you. This has been most interesting, and I guess that's what I want to do, is to provide everybody some food for thought. And of course, as I always recommend, do your own research. And this is a topic that I've begun to research. And one of the things is with me is when I get something like this that grabs my attention, I really do spend a great deal of time, and I am. And of course, would like to have you back. But I do say that, could you tell, is there anything else that you want to add that people should really focus on when they begin to examine this topic? Because it is going to hit everybody like a ton of bricks. Of that, there is no doubt.
Yeah, don't get too frustrated right away. And that is, look, I mean, I was literally banging my head on the keyboard after a while because I couldn't believe that, because you're going to be upset. But I mean, there's going to be a weird sense of euphoria after a while, but you're going to be upset because you missed it. It was like being suckered by a street magic trick. And that was, it was there. It was the ace of spades was in the guy's back. It was in your back pocket the entire time and you never knew it. So it takes a while. Some people take days, some people take weeks. Just the easiest way to research things, you don't even have to look at my stuff or even go to my website. Just go into YouTube and type in flat earth and set the filter to this year. Once you start going down it, just absorb everything you can and look at all the different aspects and realize when you're going through it, why it's so polarizing, why you have, why you are bracing against it. Because I did too. I wasn't kidding when I told people that the first time I ever clicked on one of these links, I was physically embarrassed. And I was going, I've clicked on links that say the royalty or lizard people. And that never bothered me. It's like, why would this? Because it seems like such a simple concept, but we all laugh at it and you got to wonder why. And now I don't. I laughed until I stopped laughing. And now I just watch other people go through the same process that I do. And it's a wonderful thing.
So the model that you have presented, which I guess somewhat corresponds with the biblical model, that there is this thing called the firmament, which is above us, and it's like the dome. By the way, they made this TV program called Under the Dome, which I really
it's still out.
It is, eh?
Yeah, I watched Stephen King and Steven Spielberg. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
So then you have this earth, which is, by the way, the Bible calls is an interesting in Genesis 1 that God called the dry land earth. It specifically says that it was the earth part is only dry land, and all the waters he calls seas. So those are, but let's leave it that, it is like that movie Dark City, that this is a disc shape, it's round, it's circular, and it has this dome like in the Truman Show, except it's much bigger. And, if man can do things like this, like they have that dome in Arizona or something where people have been living inside for, with the technology, it should be doable. So if anybody would have it, God would have it. So the earth is fixed. It is not rotating. It is not spinning. It's fixed. But the whole firmament, which contains the stars and the sun and the moon, it rotates around it, which is what we see with our eyes, by the way. It is not. It's something we can see every day. I wake up every morning and see the sun rise, and it's moving across the sky.
And we imitate it. I memean, what's a planetarium? We've all been to one. I mean, a planetarium is just a big domed structure with stars and planets flying around the sky. We do this now. We have the ability to do this on a small scale. It's interesting that people don't quite get it because it's bigger. That's all it is.
It is bigger. It is bigger. And, that's what interesting when you mentioned planetarium. This came into my head the other day. I said, why doesn't somebody make a real model of this globe Earth, fill it up with water and everything, put an atmosphere, and show it in a planetarium. Let's see how this would work.
That is neat. I like that.
Yeah. They always have these little balls spinning around, but do a real to-scale model, and let's see it. Let's see the water not fly off it, when the Earth is spinning 1,000 miles an hour, and what is keeping it all glued together. And anyhow, those are the kind of things which I don't think we'll see. But Mark, before we go, thank you. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on my program. And I'm sure this is going to be quite a controversial show, but that's okay. I don't shy away from controversies. But could you please share, like, your channel, your website information, wherever people can find your work?
You bet. The main website is called Enclosed, ENCLOSED, enclosedworld.com. In fact, it hasn't even been up that long, maybe even 6 months. All the stuff there mirrors the YouTube stuff. So on YouTube, I've got a channel called Mark K. Sargent, but don't look for that. Just type in Flat Earth Clues.
How do you spell your last name, by the way?
Oh, Sargent.
This is not
No, it's not the military spelling.
right.
And the really, you don't even have to go to YouTube to do it. You can type in any search engine, Flat Earth Clues, whatever you use, it'll pop up. All you have to do is click on videos. It will link to it. All my stuff is Creative Commons license, so I let it get mirrored by a lot of different people because I think that getting the word out here is way more important than trying to monetize it in any way, because it's really, really a big concept. And yeah, those are the two ways of finding it. And I'm interviewing. Plus, I do a show on Truth Frequency Network called Strange World, but all that's going to be on the site. It's also going to be on the YouTube pages. Everything's linked to everything else, so you'll be able to get to all of it. And then I do interviews like this one.
Well, I'm glad that your guests that you brought on, because of their expertise and their backgrounds, like the industrial valve guy, the surveyor,
yeah. The submarine guy, the missile guy, the flight instructor. Oh, yeah.
Right. So, these people are, they're confirming what the information that you brought out. So it's not just you saying it. So it's good that, other people with a professional background, they are also confirming it. And that's why I really enjoyed a lot of those programs. But thank you for coming on, and well, let's get back together again in the near future and continue this talk, because I think there's so much to be said about this that you can't really possibly cover it all in 1, 2, maybe even in 20 shows. Who knows?
Thanks.
All right, Mark. Take care.
All right.
Solo videos en inglés y español. Normally I produce only videos in English and Spanish. Normalerweise produziere ich nur Videos en English und Spanish. Pero hoy voy a hacer otra excepción y traducirlo también en alemán. But today I make another exception and translate it into German too. Aber heute werde ich nochmal eine Ausnahme machen und es auch in Deutsch übersetzen. Ya algunas semanas tengo escrito en mi lista de tareas por hacer de traducir el video #BTC4. Now already some weeks ago I have written on my to-do list to translate the video BTC4, #BTC4. Schon seit ein paar Wochen habe ich auf meiner To-Do-Liste geschrieben, den Video BTC4 in Deutsch zu übersetzen. Estoy segura que esta idea puede ayudar a mucha gente económicamente. I'm sure that this can help many people economically. Ich bin sicher, dass diese Idee vielen Leuten finanziell helfen kann. Y da motivación para aprender Bitcoin. And give motivation to learn about Bitcoin. Und Motivation geben, über Bitcoin zu lernen. En este momento el precio de Bitcoin es muy bajo, económico. At the moment the price of Bitcoin is very low, economic. Im Moment ist der Preis von Bitcoin sehr tief. Sería el momento ideal para invertir. Hoy es el 15 de abril 2015. Would be the ideal moment to invest. Today is April 15th, 2015. Es wäre der ideale Moment zu investieren. Heute ist der 15. April 2015. El 27 de marzo 2015 he publicado en mi canal de YouTube Vanos Enigma el primer vídeo sobre hashtag BTC4 explicando cómo me vino esta idea. On March 27th of 2015, I published the first video about hashtag BTC4 in my channel YouTube Vanos Enigma, explaining how I got the idea. Am 27. März 2015 habe ich in meinem YouTube-Channel Vanos Enigma den ersten Video über Hashtag BTC4 veröffentlicht und erklärt, wie ich diese Idee bekommen habe. La idea consiste principalmente en lo siguiente. The idea mainly consists in the following. Die Idee besteht hauptsächlich in folgendem. Imprimir direcciones de Bitcoin en papel, 10 o mínimo 10 o mejor 100. To print Bitcoin directions in paper, at least 10 or better 100. Bitcoin-Adressen in Papier ausdrucken, mínimo 10 oder besser gleich 100. Y luego poner en cada dirección de Bitcoin una pequeña cantidad de Bitcoin. And then put in every Bitcoin direction a little amount of Bitcoin. Und dann in jede Bitcoin-Adresse eine kleine Summe von Bitcoin transferieren. Y la próxima vez, cuando otra vez ves una persona por la calle pidiendo dinero, and the next time you see again a person begging for money on the street, und das nächste Mal, wenn du wieder eine Person auf der Straße betteln siehst, y para tus amigos y amigas, and for your friends, of course, und für deine Freunde natürlich, o tal vez de propina en un restaurante, or maybe a tip in a restaurant, oder Trinkgeld im Restaurant. Bueno, a la hora de imprimir también copiar y guardar las llaves privadas de Bitcoin, de direcciones de Bitcoin. When you print the Bitcoin addresses, copy and save the private keys of the Bitcoin addresses, of course. Wenn man die Bitcoin-Adressen druckt, auch die privaten Schlüssel, Bitcoin-Address-Schlüsseln, kopieren und speichern. Y a la hora de distribuir las direcciones de Bitcoin, escribir la fecha, por ejemplo, hoy es el 15 de abril 2015, escribir la fecha más plus 4 años, igual 15 de abril 2019. And then in the moment when you distribute the Bitcoin addresses, you write the date, for example, today, April 15th, 2015, plus 4 years is April 15th, 2019. Und dann in dem Moment, wenn man die Bitcoin-Adressen verteilt, auf das Papier schreiben, das heutige Datum, zum Beispiel 15. April 2015, plus 4 Jahre ist gleich 15.04.2019. Luego vas a explicar a la gente, mira, esta es la llave privada, tú y yo la tienes. Si no quitas, transfieres este dinero de Bitcoin en estos 4 años, yo lo vuelvo a tener o sacar. Then you explain to the people, look, this is the private key. I have it and you have it. If you don't take this money, Bitcoin, out of this account, I will take it out in these 4 years, at the end of these 4 years. Und dann erklärst du den Leuten, schau, das ist der private Schlüssel. Ich und du haben diesen privaten Schlüssel, Bitcoin-Schlüssel. Wenn du bis Ende dieser 4 Jahre das Geld Bitcoin nicht raustust, dann hole ich es zurück. De esta forma, das más motivación a la gente para empezar a aprender cómo funciona Bitcoin. This way, you give more motivation to the people to learn how the technology of Bitcoin functions. Auf diese Weise gibst du mehr Motivation den Leuten zu lernen, wie die Technologie von Bitcoin funktioniert. En mi video antiguo.
When I first heard this flat earth subject, I dismissed it without even giving it a second thought. But more recently, at the beginning of 2015, I ran across a few flat earth videos again. And while looking into the fake moon photos circulating around, I saw that people were claiming that the images from Earth from space were fake as well. Pretty soon the flat earth subject became viral online. And after looking at the Apollo missions one night and coming to the conclusion that they were nothing more than a huge con game, it jarred my memory about something. And for a very specific reason, I decided to look deeply into the flat earth without just dismissing it blindly as so many do. Why did I look into it this time? Well, I do pray for knowledge and wisdom and discernment, but maybe the recent Apollo footage I watched helped. However, I live near a very large lake, Lake Ontario, and I happen to remember going to the beach as a kid and looking across the lake and seeing New York State coast off in the distance. I never ever thought anything about it ever, except I remember it being there when I went to the beach. Now, I've been to that beach 100 times over the years. And once this topic gained more prominence in early 2015, the first video I saw explained the curvature of the Earth and what it's supposed to be in inches per mile. And it resonated with me because I remember that I could see clear across the lake to the other coast, something that broke all the sphere Earth rules. So with NASA fakery on my mind and the memory of seeing this coastline that supposedly was too far below the horizon for me to be able to see it due to the curvature of the Earth, I re-examined the flat Earth theory. And as unbelievable as it seemed, it started to make a lot of sense, especially since I did distinctly remember being able to see that far coast basically anytime I was at my local beach. And as I've said, I've been there hundreds of times over the years. But even so, I went back to the beach recently and stood at the shore. I looked south and guess what? I could see the New York State coastline just like I remember. Now I googled the distance and it was approximately 36 miles. I learned what the curvature of the Earth is supposed to be exactly at that distance, and according to the people that believe in the sphere, I found out that the coast should have been buried below my ability to see it by almost 900 feet. That part of the New York State coast had a top elevation of less than 300 feet. So that left at least a huge 600-foot discrepancy, and even more because I could see some of the height of the far shore. Was something really wrong with the reality that they've been selling us ever since we were born? Well, I ended up becoming a little fixated on proving or disproving the concept. And at first I truly thought disproving the flat Earth would be rather easy. I thought there had to be a reasonable explanation why I could see so far beyond the so-called curved barrier. I learned about light refraction and superior mirages. I learned about perspective and horizons. I learned about how our eyes work. I viewed dozens of similar experiences on YouTube. I listened to experts and people who thought they had logical but spherical explanations. In fact, I tried for a few months to debunk the concept and just couldn't. The more I looked into it, the more sense it made, and the less likely that the sphere model we've been spoon-fed since birth was a reality. It's just flat out wrong. And as more people shared their experiences and proofs online, it only added to my growing, pretty much unwavering belief that the world is not what we've been told. And learning about how our eyes work and how perspective work helps a lot with understanding sunrises and sunsets and ships disappearing hull first at sea and other supposed sphere Earth proofs. I can't say for certain what shape the Earth is or how big it is, or if there's an Antarctic ring or a barrier beyond it, or if it's an infinite plane. Maybe everything we theorize is not complete. There are so many possibilities that it blows the mind, and the flat Earth has no real complete standard model because it's all based on us finding out things for ourselves. We agree on the facts and certain basics, but the rest is only hypothetical even if it seemingly makes sense. And as the evidence mounts for both the flat Earth and against the sphere, I wanted to create a special place where folks can learn and share what they've learned with other supporters. Differences of opinion are certainly going to come forth and should be expressed openly. But remember that the goal of my videos and their corresponding threads is to provide the opportunity to use each of us to learn and grow in any area that any of us has a problem in. If there is a thing you can't understand, then ask. Someone will have an opinion and we can go from there. If you have a point to make against what is considered an accepted flat Earth fact, please provide any relevant links or supporting proofs or videos. I am currently under the impression that the entire space program, even low Earth orbit, and all that is there, is really just a sleight-of-hand trick by a group of illusionists that have swindled the public, the governments of the world, the media, and us into believing a lie. Everybody, a small group of corporations and cabals have almost complete control over the entire financial, educational, high-level governmental and media systems, leaving it up to real armchair scientists and normal people that can critically think and recreate experiments themselves to independently prove or disprove any accepted line of thought about our reality. Look, I ain't the smartest man on the flat Earth, but I ain't no dummy. I'm educated, and I never ever questioned or ever thought of an alternative to a sphere Earth until this year. It never entered my mind to question this part of our reality at all, ever. But now I question everything. I'm a Christian, and I think I see the big picture. Thanks for watching my video. If you'd like to see more proof against the heliocentric model and proof against the sphere, then make sure to subscribe to my channel. And if there's anything you disagree with, make sure you leave a note below explaining exactly why. Remember folks, follow the golden rule. God loves you. We'll talk soon.
You go to see a movie, it's everywhere in your face, and there's a reason for it. Okay. I'll begin part 2 with a short clip of the Apollo 11 press conference with the 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. We've all seen press conferences after, say, the Super Bowl or the recent World Series, and see how people react with unbridled joy and pride after what they consider has been a great victory. Contrast that with the reactions of the 3 astronauts in this press conference who had supposedly just accomplished successfully the greatest feat in human history. And as you watch this press conference, see if you also get the same feeling like I did, that these guys were at their grandmother's funeral or something, not at the celebration of the greatest victory in human history. The Kansas City Royals just won the World Series, and here's 2 guys from that team describing their experience. Now, I'll just play a couple of minutes of this, and then I'm going to play Neil Armstrong and the other 2 guys from the Apollo 11 mission, and I would like people to just pay attention and see the difference in the reactions of the guys that won a baseball game, and then these guys who supposedly came back from a 500,000-mile journey to the moon and back with their lives intact.
I didn't know that's that many people in Kansas City.
They found them somehow.
There's not, right? I mean, wow. It looks like the Pope came or something. It's unbelievable. It's just, that was fantastic. I got to say, we're very happy for you guys. But there's one meme I saw of you online. It said, on a scale of 1 to Salvador Perez, how happy are you today? Look at how happy you are. That is just the best. I mean, that's how I would be if I won the World Series too. But,
and now the Apollo 11 press conference from 1969.
At this time, I'd like to introduce the Apollo 11 crew, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, Edwin Aldrin. Neil?
It was our pleasure to have participated in one great adventure. It's an adventure that took place not just in the month of July, but rather one that took place in the last decade. We all here and the people listening in today had the opportunity to share that adventure over its developing and unfolding in the past months and years. It's our privilege today to share with you some of the
time and time and time again. Okay? The powers that be know their greatest ally in covering up their nefarious deeds is the fearful public, who will defend the status quo even to the point of destroying messengers like Gary Webb, who were just reporting the truth, nothing more. In regards to the topic of the plain earth, in the intro to part 1, I did say I would like to build a case that would stand up in a court of law. Okay? In part 1, I presented nothing more than a part of the opening arguments. Okay? So that was basically, I would say, the equivalent of just the opening arguments, nothing more to the case, yet many people have reached a verdict when the trial has not even yet begun. I will continue to present the evidence that I've gathered so far and will continue to gather. It may take months, maybe longer, to present all this evidence, but those who will stay the course with me as I do these programs, interviews, and even my own videos on this subject, they will be rewarded with the truth. Schopenhauer said the truth passes to 3 stages. Okay? In the first stage, it is ridiculed. In the second stage, it meets with violent opposition. In the final stage, it is accepted as self-evident. I believe the day will come when the truth of the plain earth will be considered to be self-evident, when people will be going, oh yeah, I knew that way back when, okay? After it passes through the ridicule and the violent opposition stages. So we'll wait for that day. One clarification I want to make is that I have changed the title from Flat Earth Facts to Plain Earth Facts. The right terminology is very important in conveying the right meaning. I believe flat earth is not the right term to describe the earth and the topic that is being discussed. Plain earth, as P-L-A-N-E, earth, is much more appropriate because the earth is not flat everywhere, but it is a plane everywhere. The social engineers of our world choose words and terms very carefully. For example, we see symbols of the globe everywhere, especially in banking, which should be a big red herring for everyone, okay? And also in verbiage repeatedly used in the media when an agenda is being pushed. For example, global warming, globalization, and Alex Jones's favorite word, globalist. These words are all carefully chosen to shape people's beliefs in an agenda about which they may or may not have any idea. Enough said. Okay. Do your own research on these matters. Go see how often this globe is in the logo of some of the most major and, should I say, evil corporations in the world. And how often, even in Hollywood, for example, the Universal logo. And
it's called perjury. We have an entire legal system that deals with crap like that, and they wouldn't do it. I was going, wait. And once I got into the enclosed world, though, then it made way more sense, because I was going, oh, I get it. Because when you're swearing on something like that, you're not swearing on the Bible. It didn't have to be a Bible. You're swearing. If you know, because I have no doubt the Apollo astronauts knew that they were told why they were going to be faking this, and they don't tell astronauts anymore. They just tell them you're faking it, you don't have clearance. But with the Apollo astronauts, they told them, and they realized, you know what, they're not going to do anything malicious again ever in their lives, including lying. And most of them became recluses. You would think that, ticker tape parades, and they'd be super happy. Look at the press conference after that first big moon mission, where they were sitting there in front of the International Press Corps. You'd think these guys would be just glowing with with basking in their own glory, and they looked like, I've never seen men that were that down. It's because they were faking something too big.
Right.
But But to get to your stars point, yes, faking the moon mission, that was a problem because you can't. The computer technology wasn't available then. Now we could do it if we wanted to, because you can get the constellations. Here's the problem: if the stars aren't in the exact right place at the right time, if you take a picture and you stamp it, someone eventually is going to figure it out. Some math geek is going to figure out, it's okay, if the moon's here, the Earth's here, stars are in that corner, and they're going to basically match up the date timestamp
Right.
with the stars. So if the belt of Orion is over the astronaut's shoulder in this picture and it's not supposed to be, someone's going to figure that out. And that is way too hard mathematically, especially in the 60s, to try to fake that, because it would be so hard to do even the major constellations behind them and get them all in the right place at the right time. No. So they just said, you know what, we're not going to deal with it at all. We're just going to have no stars in any shot, which was that was asked by the International Press Corps, and Neil Armstrong, if I'm not mistaken, almost caught himself on that because he was like wavering. He's like, "Oh, I don't remember seeing any." And the other two guys were like, "Oh, no, there were no stars." They're looking at him like, "Dude,
how is that possible that there are no stars?" That just is something which boggles my mind. It's
yeah.
They tell us, you should see it much more spectacularly out there because there's no light pollution. It's just the blackness of space. Any source of illumination would be probably 10 times brighter than we see on Earth.
Yeah.
No stars.
It was ridiculous. And I'll go one more because you brought up the ISS, and I interview people on my own as well, and I interviewed an industrial valve expert. He called me up and said, "Look, I've been listening to what you've been talking about." And he goes, "Look," there's very few companies in the world that actually make industrial valves. People don't know that. And these are like the seals and the valves for and they deal with the military, like submarines and very, very heavy stuff.
Details of that final month of July, that was certainly the highlight for the three of us of that decade.
And secondly, when you looked up at the sky, could you actually see the stars and the solar corona in spite of the glare?
We were never able to see stars from the lunar surface or on the daylight side of the moon by eye without looking through the optics. I don't recall during the period of time that we were photographing the solar corona what stars we could see.
I don't remember seeing any.
And now here's the second and final part of my interview with Mark Sargent.
You had to you had to fake the moon landing, and I lost my other train of thought, but I'll come back to it eventually.
While you're on this topic, yesterday, by the way, was the anniversary. Yesterday, or the day before, that the space station, so-called International Space Station, has been up there for 15 years. Okay, and everybody released a bunch of pictures that they've taken over the years. And one of the things that's the commonality between that and the Apollo photos and everything is that space is always black. Okay. That there are no stars.
Yeah.
Except I saw one photo in which was obviously looked like photoshops. They show this the space shuttle hanging upside down with this cargo bay doors open and blah blah. And then you see, it was taken at night and it was beautiful stars in the background. Okay, so that was a shot. So it looks like somebody took a picture of the sky, pasted the space shuttle on top, and that's. But every other picture was black. There's no stars. Even at nighttime, they show this picture of the moon rising, one photo, beautiful photograph, which, by the way, because they slanted at a certain angle, was trying to create the illusion of a curve on the horizon. But when I took that photo, I flipped it over, and the horizon is absolutely flat. Okay, so but there are no stars. And this was a problem with the Apollo missions, wasn't it? With the astronauts?
You can't, if you're going to fake something. And I remembered what I was going to talk about was astronauts gone wild. Let me mention that real quick, and I'll go into the stars thing because otherwise I'll forget it because it's early. The astronauts wild thing really bugged me because when he was interviewed, when all the astronauts were interviewed by this one journalist who was just kind of a jerk, but which is probably why he won't talk to me when I say things like that, because he ambushed him and he was trying to trip him up with multiple questions, and he thought of something. It's like, well, you know what, I'm just going to bring out a King James Bible and have him swear on it real quick and say, hey, by the way, swear that you went to the moon, and no one would do it. And that really bugged me. That stuck in my head for a while because it didn't make any sense. I was like, why would they care? Why would they care? Were they strong Christians? Are they Boy Scouts? Why would they not swear in the Bible? People lie under oath all the time.
Hello and welcome. This is Paul Sandhu. This is part 2 of the Plain Earth interview I did with Mark Sargent about a week ago. I posted part 1 about 4 days ago, and I must say it has had a tremendous response from viewers. As I warned in the intro to part 1, I expected this topic to elicit a deep emotional response from viewers and listeners. This warning was based upon my own experience, and I must say that I was not disappointed. The topic of the plain earth seems to hit viewers like a ton of bricks, just as it happened with me. Judging from many of the comments on my YouTube channel, I'm led to conclude that the Matrix has a strong hold on people's minds in regards to this subject. And sadly, many people will not be able to break free from the hold that the Matrix has on their minds. When people attack the messenger rather than critique the message, it shows a want of critical thinking ability in the individual. By the way, if you want to see how a message is discredited by attacking the messenger, watch the movie Kill the Messenger. This is a great movie, and I highly recommend it. This movie is the true life story of Gary Webb, who connected the CIA to the drug trade in the US. Okay? This movie that's Gary Webb. He was a journalist from San Jose, California, and he broke the story that the CIA was bringing in crack cocaine into Los Angeles and the rest of the country too. And first the story was big. He won like Journalist of the Year award and everything else, and then a discrediting campaign began, and eventually he committed suicide with 2 shots to his head. Okay, so that's Gary Webb's story. So it's an interesting movie. I would recommend that you watch it. Okay, so to this day, despite overwhelming evidence that the CIA, DEA, and other alphabet agencies and police departments across the country are heavily involved in managing the drug trade, trade being the operative word since it is a business, most Americans are ignorant of this fact because the media is complicit and they hide all this illegal and immoral activity that is conducted by the highest levels of government, okay? So to this day, the evidence is there, yet most people are ignorant of this fact, and they would not believe it even if the evidence is laid out in front of them as it has been